Welcome to Dynamics Corner, the go-to podcast where we dive deep into the world of Microsoft Dynamics 365, where we aim to bring you expert insights, tips, and discussions around all things Dynamics. Whether you're just starting out on your Dynamics journey or you're seasoned pro, there's always something to learn and discuss here on Dynamics Corner. I'm your host, Chris.
And this is Brad. This episode was recorded on June 7th, 2023. Chris. Another exciting episode. I feel I should record that because I say it every time. But these episodes that we have excite me because of the topics we get to talk about, the members of the community that we get to speak with, the information that is shared. And with us today, we have another great guest that was able to speak with us in detail about what is behind the AL compiler. For the AL, if you listen,
what is it?
The AL language that builds Business Central. With us today, we have the engineering manager, Steffen Balslev. Good evening, sir. How are you doing?
Good evening. I'm good. Good. It's sunny outside, so I'm really happy today.
That's good.
It's a sunny evening.
Yeah.
So I'm thankful for you taking the time to speak with us today. I've been looking forward to this conversation, as I am with every conversation, and I'm happy that you were here to talk with us about a topic that fascinates me more than many of the conversations that we have. Yeah, I had to do the drum roll. See, I'm learning better and better how to manage the soundboard.
You gotta time it.
Here to talk with you about. Say that again.
You gotta time it. You're timing
Chris?
it really good now.
Yes, it's practice. I played with it and disrupted everybody in some of the conversations, but now I'm timing it a little bit better. So, Steffen, here we are to talk with you about something that's dear to me, that I eat, breathe, sleep, dream about as well, and that's the AL compiler.
Sounds good.
It's something that a lot of us use on a regular basis. That's the foundation of one of the great Business Central applications. But a lot of us may not know too much about the actual AL compiler. I have a list of questions for you. But if you would, before we get into talking about the AL compiler, if you would, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, as you know, I'm the engineering manager for the developer tools team in Business Central. And this just means that I'm responsible for the compiler and the work we do there. So that's my work part. On my private part, I'm a father of two great boys. They're 22 now, which means I'm 45, something like that. So that's an interesting aspect of one's life, right?
Oh, tell me about it. I know all about that.
And then I'm an avid motorcycle rider. I have a Harley and a Suzuki, and I really enjoy riding the open road. That's why Sunshine is really a good friend of mine.
Oh, it is great. So you have a Harley and a Suzuki. Which Suzuki do you have?
It's an Intruder PL 1500. Yeah.
Nice.
It's very nice. I had that for like 15 years now. It's a very old bike.
Oh, nice. I want to say used to ride, but I had been riding for 20 years, and I stopped last year or maybe the year before because it just became unsafe. Not because of how I drove, but just people on the road with me. I had too many calls where people were texting, not paying attention, and I just got to the point where you had mentioned, I got a little older. I'm like, do I really need to worry about this every time I go out? So I erred to get rid of my motorcycle or sell my motorcycle and stick with four wheels, because when you have two wheels, once something happens to one, you fall, you hit the pavement. You have four wheels, a little less likely that you're going to hit the pavement, but you still could have a problem. But I enjoyed riding for a long time. And there's nothing like the wind and the freedom that you have from riding, and the feeling just being out there.
I have a Street Glide from 2018. Yeah.
Oh,
It's
nice.
an anniversary edition. I'm very proud of it. It's
Oh,
number 19 of
nice, nice.
1900. So,
So,
and
so
it's like
hopefully you
this
get to,
dusty blue. So I'm really,
hopefully you
really
get to
happy about
cruise
it.
the open road out there.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. So I use it as my zen, right? So the ride to work in the morning is my way of collecting my thoughts and getting into that moment where I'm ready to work. And the same when I go home, I have about half an hour, 45 minutes to and from
Oh,
work.
that's nice.
Yeah,
That's a nice
so
ride.
it's a very nice relaxation for me.
So, how long have you
Again,
been the engineering manager for the DevTools team?
Oh, so that's actually quite recent. I had a different team called server management, which was doing the load balancing and all these things around the infrastructure before. And then about a year, a little more than a year ago, I moved in and took over the compiler team and the developer tools team.
Oh,
So
that's
I'm
great.
fairly new in that. Yeah.
Oh, I was wondering how somebody could get that type of position because it's a pretty
Hard
important
work.
position to me, I believe,
Yeah. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
manage that, to see what's out there.
So it's very different from other teams because it's a different target audience, right? In the product group, we normally talk about the customer focus and the end user and these stories around the usage of the product. Whereas in this developer tools team, we have a completely different user group, right? It's not customers, it's partners, it's the developers. It's a different audience.
And I know that developer audience can be a little rough too. We we
Oh,
have a different way of thinking sometimes, so
yeah, they have requirements.
yeah, it can be a little difficult. Uh,
Yeah.
just we get into, we talk about the AL compiler. We hear it's interesting how this all started. I mean, one of the things that intrigued me about Navision when I first started working with it way back in the dinosaur days, as Chris often reminds me, we had Seaside, or we had the, what was it, client side integration development environment, I believe is
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
that acronym stood for then, where you had an application that had a development environment within it,
Hmm.
that you developed the application itself with that same environment, and that was all stored within the application.
Yeah.
And then now we've progressed to using AL, but what is a compiler? If you had to explain to somebody, because we talk about you're managing the dev tools of the compiler team, what is a compiler, or what is the AL compiler?
So the classic definition of a compiler is something that produces runnable code, right? So you take some text, something, and then you throw it into a compiler, and out comes something that can execute. That's kind of the classic definition of it. And that also means that the AL compiler is perhaps not a compiler. It's more of a transpiler. It
Okay.
takes the text that you import in a format called AL and then converts it into metadata that describes what tables there are and so forth, and it compiles it into or transforms it into some C# code that is then actually compiled and executed on the server.
Okay.
So it's kind of a transpiler in the clearer sense of the word, or you can call it a translator or a transcompiler, like different things, source to source compiler, like different words for the same thing. We call it a compiler because the app package is in our context the runnable code, right? So you
Okay.
take an app package and you put it on the server and then you run it, right? That's
Yes.
kind of how it works. And it does kind of all the same things as a classical compiler. It has the lexer to figure out what's going on, the parser to figure out the code tree and all these constructs that's in there. It has all the extra validation of correctness, and then the actual compiling or linking it together with all the things that needs to be connected to, like the AL API and NST and so forth, and the packaging in the end. So you get the nice app package that you can share and run on the NST, so to speak.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the AL compiler translates the AL code
Mm.
into C#, which then gets executed by the Business Central executables that you are running on the NST.
Yeah, so there's two artifacts, so to speak, in the AL app package that are important. That's the metadata around the app and the description of schema and so many other things like entitlements and permission sets and so forth. And then there's the code that you write, the
Okay.
C# code that it gets turned into. And that's put into the NST where it's run, the first thing the NST does is compile again the C# into DLLs, right? And then that's what's executing. So we call into the functions that's in the C# library and get them to execute. Yeah.
Is that done at runtime, or is it compiled when it's loaded, when you import an extension or load an extension into Business Central, and then it translates the code into C#, C# code, or C# libraries, which then are executed by the NST? We'll say the NST,
Yeah.
or is it precompiled and saved, or is it runtime?
So you can choose to do runtime packages when you compile using the compiler from outside the NST, or export the runtime package from the NST. Then you get an artifact that has C# in it.
Okay.
And that's the code that we run on the server. So it's not really precompiled as in IL, but it's precompiled into C#. A normal app package will contain the source code. So what happens in VS Code is the compilation and validation, all these things. And then on the server, we compile again into C# and then DLLs, right? That's the normal app package. So the runtime packages will have the C# precompiled, where normal app packages will have the compilation happening both in VS Code and on the NST to both C# and XML and DLLs in the end.
So with that, and that's something that I'm learning. There's so many things I'm sure I'm going to learn from here, and it will lead to some additional questions. With the runtime package being pre-compiled C# code,
Mm-hmm.
in essence, would there be a performance enhancement by using runtime packages, or no? Is there no difference?
No, so it's the same thing.
Okay.
What you get from the runtime packages is more a way to distribute your package without sharing the source code, because then the AL source code and the definition of your project is not really in clear text in the app package, so it's not easy to decompile and get the proprietary IP from it, right?
Okay.
So you can share it with people on prem, and you can get them to execute your code without having to share your IP, so to speak.
Okay. That's what I've been using the runtime packages. From the explanation, I wasn't certain if there was any benefit from
the
using
challenge, of course, is that once you've compiled it to C#, an upgrade of the NST does not recompile it then, because it doesn't know the AL source, so it cannot recompile it again. Imagine we had a fix in our compiler that would fix an issue with the generated C#.
Okay.
Because we don't have the AL code to regenerate the C#, you don't get that benefit, and you get that mismatch of runtime packages in the NST. Right?
That's a very good point to make, because if you generate a runtime with a specific version of AL, if an update to the AL language or the AL extension is released, you don't get the benefit of the recompilation into the C# code. So you would have to do it and then redistribute.
Exactly.
AL, what is the definition of AL? Does it mean application language? Because we had Seaside, we had Cal at one point, and then when I tell people, oh, you work with AL, and then you say, oh, I work with AL language, it's almost redundant, because it's almost saying the application language.
Yeah. Well, you can say the name is application language, so it's an application language. But yes, it means application language.
Oh, okay, that's great. So, and I know originally when it was defined, it was a Pascal-based language, if I stand correct. Something that I had. That's what got me into it, because at that time I had worked with Delphi. I'd worked with Pascal all the way back in the day of my starts in the dinosaur days, and that's what pulled me into the Navision world, because I had the skill for Pascal and was able to pick it up. Is it still considered a Pascal-based language, or is it morphing to be more C# like, or is it a blend between the two?
So it's still using some of the same patterns as Pascal, and you'll see that in the beginning and the placement of semicolons and the assignment operators and stuff like that. We try not to use C# syntax, even though like behind the scenes we use C# and we have C++ and all sorts of things in our other languages that we're using. So naturally we get inspired, but we try to keep it to the original way of defining the language. It's not quite Pascal, but it looks a lot like it.
It does look a lot like it, but I also see some C# tendencies with like text to upper, text to lower, text split. And that's why I was asking. And then also there's some other, to me, similarities with interfaces, for example, that were recently introduced. So
that's where we need to be pragmatic. We want to help people, and we don't want to hold back the language, so to speak, just because we want to adhere to 1990s Pascal, right? So we need to find a middle ground somewhere. And a lot of the things we do are based on the .NET framework libraries, right? Or the .NET Core libraries. So naturally, we do not try to change the name if it's called 2-upper in the underlying framework, then we call it 2-upper, right?
Yes. No, it's well, I could see that, like you said, just be pragmatic. There are definitely some tendencies even within the application that tied back to 1998 that hopefully sometime we can get rid of the patterns. But developing the compiler, how do you do it? Do you write it? So you write C# code, or I mean, I know you have the extension in VS Code, but we have C# code that is written to then translate the language to convert it. What is involved in doing that? To me, that sounds like a tedious task to be able to match a pattern, then take that pattern and translate it into another language in essence.
Yeah, so we use the well-known patterns, well-known implementations of it. We try not to reinvent everything, so we're using like TextMate to describe the lex of our language, right? And you can find that on GitHub, the definition of the language in a TextMate format. And we reuse from the C# compiler what we can. Some of the ways they do it, we find inspiration in, and we take that back to the way we write it. We have a lot of legacy from back when it was in C-side. That project, when we moved from C-side to a V6 to an AL compiler, we had to bring forward a lot of the things that worked before. We couldn't just start all over and write a new compiler. So it has a lot of that information and a lot of that logic still in the new compiler, although it's cleaned up and it's using newer patterns and all sorts of things. We still need to support the same syntax and the same compilations in the end. So a lot of knowledge comes from there. But when you look at it, it's not that complicated. It's complicated because there's a lot, right? But if you just start from a single statement and saying, I want to write a compiler or a transpiler for a single statement, that can be done quite easily. The hard part is maintaining structure when you get like an exploded language and you get more and more functionality in there.
Yes, well,
that's a lot part of our work, right? Making sure we are consistent and we keep remembering to add stuff everywhere.
That I could see, because even translating, if I wanted to write something myself in AL to translate to perform some actions in AL, I could do that easily. But now I think back to, like, you have procedure, you have a local procedure, you have a begin and an end, you have a for each, you have all of these nested structures, which to me seems, maybe it's because I haven't worked with developing a compiler of this nature, seems a little bit tedious and difficult. So I commend everybody who works on this. How many people work on the team for managing the compiler or developing the compiler or maintaining it?
So we're about 10 people right now that are dedicated to this, and then people are helping out with some of the features that has to go in. So it's not only the compiler team that's working on the compiler, others are contributing from the team. So we are more than just the core team.
You had mentioned the AL repository. There are many Microsoft GitHub repositories around Business Central that I follow and keep up with the changes on. Is that repository for the entire AL language?
No, it's not. We have the AL compiler and the V6 in a separate repository. But the repository is there to communicate with partners and developers directly. And it's a way for us to interact and share samples and documentation. And it's a place for developers and partners to post issues to us based on the latest V6 version. They can describe their challenges and we can take a look at it to see if we can fit it in our plans and fix it for them.
Okay, so the AL repository that is public is where if you have an issue or you think there is an issue with the AL compiler, you can go to log the issue and have interaction to see if there's a remedy, a fix, or another problem with it, as well as see releases and updates.
Yeah, one of the recent things we added is the text that you'll find in AL Home that pops up when you start the V6 or start the Visual Studio Code. That's actually coming directly from this site, so you can keep track of the updates we add.
I did see that, and I see that in there. I first thought it was going to be dynamic, but I like that it's in the repository because you do have a historical reference of what was in there.
Exactly.
And are we allowed to do pull requests so we can build stuff with the AL Home? Put messages out with the AL Home?
Not at this point in time. You're allowed to do it, but we won't approve it. But good try.
I'll try. So within that repository, if somebody thinks there's an issue, they go to the repository. They can look at the open issues and the closed issues to see if it's already been reported. And if it hasn't, they can make an issue and you would go from there.
Exactly.
And
they'll get direct contact with our engineers as we investigate the issues. Obviously, we cannot spend all of our time, even though we wanted to, on these issues, but we try to balance looking at these and looking at other things. So we kind of get to all of them at some point. Yeah.
I do like what's happening with that, where when you and I were speaking before, we talked about it opens up and it opens a door. So now the development community, because I know there's partner developers and there's also independent developers, so I prefer to reference them as the community, can have more direct interaction with the engineering team that's developing the language that we're using.
Yeah.
Who determines what gets added to the language? And within this same forum, could suggestions or recommendations be made for additions to the language? So we have new features that get added. I mentioned interfaces were added a few versions ago, for example.
Yeah,
who determines?
Excellent question. So who determines is a good question. So it's a balance between the needs of the organization. We are not just the compiler team. We support the entire platform and application in their needs. So we need to add features and functionality based on the needs of the application and the platform. So that's our number one customer, so to speak, right?
Okay.
Then we look at ideas to the language from BC Ideas, aka MS/BC Ideas. That's where we prefer all ideas to the product, whether it's the compiler or it's the actual product, to come in, because then we can have people vote on them, people can share why they need it and make more elaborate cases than on an issue. So we keep issues on the Microsoft AL GitHub for bugs and problems, and then we keep BC Ideas for new ideas, changes, and additions. So based on the need of the community and the votes it get, we try to prioritize the things that are most needed. But obviously we also need to look ahead and see, okay, what are the challenges we are going to face in the next years and try to solve. It could be interfaces. That's one of the reasons why interfaces was added, was because we saw a challenge, and it showed us that we needed to do something in modularization. And there were ideas on BC Ideas. There were discussions with partners. There were people talking to us directly and asking us, how can we do this? And then we got into the interface and implemented that, right? So it's kind of a three-way, so to speak.
I understand. So you do you look internally for the future of the application. You speak with the development community for their ideas and
Yeah.
suggestions from BC Ideas to see what the community feels is needed, and you work towards what's the best approach. You had mentioned the compiler and the platform. So your team works for the AL compiler, the V6 for Visual Studio Code, as well as the platform. Do you define the platform as the NST?
Yeah, well, the platform is a bit more, but yeah, it's generally speaking the NST, right? So my team is responsible for the developer experience, and that is a big part of that is the V6 experience and the compiler experience. But we are also involved in like app source and validation of apps that go into the marketplace, and understanding the consequences of changes in our base application in terms of how many will we break and what's the impact of doing breaking changes and all these
That's
things.
my favorite word or
Yeah,
phrase, breaking change.
yeah. It's a good
I hear
change if
that
it's a
so
breaking
often.
change, right?
It's a great change. Some of my changes are breaking changes, and I want them to go through. But
Yeah,
sometimes it's difficult to get them to go through, and you have to go through this whole process of upgrade code and move stuff around.
yeah, yeah.
It's a great journey that we
It is, and
have.
it can be challenging. It can both be challenging for the developer to align to these rules for deprecation and understanding what we can and cannot allow you to change. But it's also a challenge for us because we really want to open up and just allow anyone doing everything they want, right? That would be like the easiest path for us. Just put your stuff in there and we're happy, right? But we also need to know, to take into consideration that partners out there have PTEs that are dependent on your ISV solution, right? And if you make a breaking change or we make a breaking change, then their solution falls apart and their customer cannot move on to the next version and cannot get the latest and greatest. And it's just a nightmare if you start allowing these breaking changes everywhere, right? So we try to manage the process, and it's super challenging to get that right everywhere.
I understand. It's this. I say some of these things not in jest, but to bring to light some of the points to hear directly from you, because there is conversation where individuals talk about some of these same concepts with the breaking changes and without understanding the impact or the intent of the widespread protection. Because if you let everybody do everything, it then invalidates, in some essence, control of the application.
Mm,
And we now have an application that has problems all over because we don't have any rules.
exactly.
So the discipline is very well
Yeah.
uh,
It's a topic
managed, I think.
we continue to think about because we want to open up for more and more and more scenarios where you can do changes as you would expect that would be natural for the
I
evolution
bet.
of a piece of software. Uh, you really don't want old code lying around for many, many, many years, right? You kind of want to delete it, get rid of it, move on to new code. So it's
Yes.
something we're constantly thinking about. And yeah, we try to open when we can, but it's a long journey for us to get there.
Oh, well, I have a breaking change I need help pushing through, so maybe we can talk about afterwards.
Easy. Yeah.
I'll fix that for you. No.
Oh, perfect, perfect. See. No, this is good. This is the real reason why I wanted you on
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
because I have this, breaking change with the table field length that I need to increase,
Oh yeah, yeah,
and which goes back into, I can have some questions about, the one of the things in some essence of this conversation of how do you remove fields
yeah, yeah.
from a table, but we'll table that for after.
I love the field link discussion. It's one of the most frequent questions we get, and it's such a simple problem that just has huge consequences.
No, I understand. I understand, and I'm not going to argue
No, no.
philosophically, because I do understand the whole dependency. Because even in the case, when I was speaking with someone, they explained to me, I have a field that's a length of 10 that needs to go to 20.
Yeah,
I understand 20 going to, on the surface, 20 going to 10
easy.
data, that's an easy, okay, we risk data loss, and we can't do that because now you run in duplicate data and all problems hold over. Field length increase, you say, okay, well, the field's just increasing.
Yeah.
But then if somebody has a PTE that's relying on that and they're
Just
using a
one
value of
validate
10,
trigger, right? Just one
yes,
validate
well,
trigger that hasn't got the right length, and you're broken.
We'll talk about that. I need to get some fancy stuff. In my background, I have just a shelf. Okay, so where were we? Okay, so with the changes, or there are changes made to the V6 or the compiler language, where should someone go to keep up with the changes that are made with the versions? I myself, I look at the VS Code changelog. I also look at the AL repository for some changes. I really didn't follow exactly what the intent of was that, but thank you for that explanation. But now we have the versions that come out. We have 11.78. 2, I think, is the most recent one that was released. You had 11.871. How do we keep up with the changes of what's in each one of those versions? I know it gets updated automatically, and then we can also use previous versions, because there are some times where I see if there's a problem with compilation, revert back to a previous version. Where is the best place to keep up with that information?
Yeah, so the changelog that comes with the versions we release is the best place to find the diff between the different releases and understand what changed, what kind of fixes we made, what kind of enhancements we made, and all these things.
The changelog where? On the
in the V6.
In the V6 is the best place to look.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. So install the AL language extension and take a look at the changelog. You can also go to the marketplace, the Visual Studio Code marketplace, and then look at the changelog there. That's by far the best place to look for changes to functionality, to the language, new syntax, and all these things. We recently started shipping pre-releases of the V6. That's why you'll see a 12.0 something up there now.
Yes, that was my next question as you were talking about that.
Exactly. So this is an attempt to try and stop shipping the insider builds just for people who are insiders. We really want to be more open and have a more easy way of delivering the compiler to the people who need it. And I really want us to ship more regular a pre-release so people can test out what is coming in the next major versions of the product, because a lot of these things really require us to get feedback on the edge case scenarios that you guys are working on out there in the field, right? We have a lot of validation in the system and base application and all the first-party applications, but the real test is out there where the majority of the code lives, right? That's where we need the feedback. So,
excellent.
Yeah.
So the version 12 pre-release is intentional for developers to install the pre-release and work with the pre-release without having to download the insider build and pull the V6 from there and load it.
Exactly.
If they compile code, or they compile, I guess I don't even know what to call it right now. If we compile the AL code with the version 12 V6 today, where version 11.782 is the most current as we record this, will those work with the current version of Business Central?
Yeah, so the compiler is built on runtime versions. So as soon as you target a platform 11, then everything should work with the functionality that's in platform 11, which is then right now version 22, right? Out there. So versioning is a bit of a nightmare.
One day I hope we get over this. Wave 2023, wave 1 is version 22.
Align it.
Version 11 of the runtime, 10.5, 10.2, version 9.
Yeah. But we are versioning the language and the compiler and all the V6 functionality with the platform version. So if we add functionality to a CU3, then we'll have a runtime version that has some major .3 something. So you can see what runtime version you're targeting in your code. And this should protect you from any issues of using a 12 V6 or 11 V6.
Excellent.
As long as you're targeting the right version.
So 10.2 is, I don't even know what version 10 is. Forget it. But it's CU2 for that version of Business Central.
CU2, yeah.
Yeah,
so it's 11. It's 11 plus, right?
Okay, 11 plus, good. Until they change it and they say make it 12 or 13 or something to confuse us all.
Yeah. I don't know the historical reason for doing that kind of versioning scheme, but hey,
no,
we'll figure it out.
Yes, no, it's excellent. How can someone load that preview? What do they have to enable in their VS Code to enable that loading?
It's super easy. You go to the extensions section in Visual Studio Code, and you find the AL extension, and then you click the install pre-release or switch to pre-release, I think it's called.
Switch to pre-release. Great.
And just as easy as that is, it's equally as easy to just go back to production code or the released version, right? So you could swap back and forth if you have like some time to do prototyping or testing against the next major version. You can just install the pre-release, do that work, and then switch back to the released version if you need to. So it should be very easy.
No, that's so. Another question that I'll bring up is from where we're, from the conversation we had, and it's just from what I hear, and I know there's some conversations from following the Yammer discussions or some of the community forums or community discussions or even some of the issues. Is there ever an intention to bring something like namespaces to avoid collision across applications, or is it? See,
It's a hot
you didn't
topic.
know I
I
was
know.
going.
So
I have to get the hot topics too. I mean, if we can't discuss
So
it, it's okay too.
the short answer is yes.
Okay.
When and how that looks is not guaranteed yet. We are working on stuff that has similarities to namespaces. It's not namespaces as you see them in C#, but it feels kind of the same way. So it is something that we are actively working on and thinking about and trying to figure out how can we do this. We need to find a way where we can bring forward the existing code without requiring every single partner out there to rewrite their entire code base, right? Namespaces is a fundamental change to the language.
Yes.
Once you start using it, there's really no mix anymore.
No.
Because now as soon as you start using namespaces, you will risk name collections, absolutely. And we need to have a space where we can have the old way of doing things side by side with something spaces look-alike thingy, right?
Got it. So
and we can't just put everything into the global namespace. That's not just how it works. We need more advanced things.
No,
but
I
yes,
understand.
we are working on it.
Okay, perfect. Because I know the affix model, it works. But I know in some cases there's still some opportunity for some issues. There's another one that I'll take advantage of being able to speak with you. Object numbers and field numbers, along with the names.
Yeah. So, okay, where should I start? So the names thing is interesting also because with a namespace thought, we can maybe disconnect ourselves from the name and make that more variable and longer and all these things. There are still some challenges in the SQL, the schema, because there's a limit to what SQL can handle.
Yes.
But there might be an opportunity to do something about all the other objects. So that's absolutely something we're thinking about. I'm not saying it's going to be done, but it's something that we are thinking about and we are aware of.
Good answer.
Object numbers is an interesting one and something that's puzzling us a lot because when you look at the way we compile today, yeah. Well, not for the reason why it's there, because we know all the reasons why it's there. But when we look at how we compile today, we're using the names as references. We are resolving everything to names. We understand that this is the object that comes from this extension and has this name, so we know it's the right object. We don't really need the IDs as such. But it's still a core part of how the metadata system works. It's a core part of some of the functionality that uses, let's not call it reflection, but record refs and these things that dynamically transforms data, import, export. It could be like integration scenarios and other things that are more dynamic in their application code and reference dynamic data. They use object IDs to reference tables. They use object IDs to reference field IDs to reference fields and so forth, right? So we can't just remove it.
No.
But it would be interesting at some point, not in the short-term future, but at some point to maybe allow a model where IDs are maybe not needed.
I
How
think
that looks, I don't know.
no, I
But
think
it
that would be a
could be
great
interesting.
model. If I could
Yeah.
beat the idea that it'd get 1 million votes, I think, in a day.
I think there, if you go there, you'll find the
No,
remove
I
object
understand.
numbers somewhere in there.
No, I understand the challenges, and I do understand in some cases there's some residual changes that need to be made, or it's some things are left over from the legacy application that have progressed forward with the intent of not breaking things for everybody,
Hmm.
so that
Hmm.
you could do a gradual progression to fix and move. And there is a
Yeah.
point though, at some maybe you just need to, rip the band-aid and say, okay, everybody.
Could
Uh,
be, could be. I'm thinking as we move into the space of more and more do-it-yourself customization, uh, there will be a need to handle object numbers in a different way because we cannot reserve ID ranges in all the areas you want to customize your application.
yes.
It's going to be challenging for us to keep track of that and make sure that we don't have collisions if you move a customization from one environment to another environment. All these things that it brings on some challenges with ID numbers that we need to find a solution for in the future.
Yeah, there's a lot to it. It sounds so simple. This is another one that sounds so simple on the surface. Oh, we look at everything by name. We don't need the object IDs anymore. So why is it complaining that a field 50,000 already exists?
Yeah,
It's just I could understand now in more insight where it's going to break. The
it's a
BC
20 plus year program, right? It's been here for many, many,
Yeah.
many years. There's a
Yeah,
lot of
thank you.
layers in it, right?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I know. I
Yeah.
I started with it just when it left the character base to become the Windows based version when it first came
Yeah.
to the US back then. And it's been a journey, and
Yeah.
it's almost been, I feel married to it, as I say, because it's interesting. The So we talked about the AL code being compiled into C sharp and then processed by the platform. Does
Mhm.
that code get stored that it's compiled within the platform, or does it get stored someplace else? So we write the AL code. It's no longer stored within the database as it was with
Mhm.
Seaside. Now we have actual app files for the base app, system app, and all the PTE,
Yeah.
dev, and global extensions. Where do those get stored? Do they get stored in a schema or a
Yeah.
SQL
Yeah.
table in the schema there?
Good question. Yeah. So we still store the NST system information in the SQL, and it's stored in what we call the application database, which is one part of the data that is required to run an environment, right? We have the application database that has all the system metadata, the NST and inter-NST communication. And then we have the tenant database, which is where all the customer data resides, right? So the application database is still a repository for the data that is required to run the service. And in here, you'll find the app files, you'll find the compiled metadata, and you'll find some of the resources that are in the app file, like the permission set and these things. That data will be unwrapped into the application database, so we can easily query for it, and we can manipulate it like we would records and other data that we normally work with inside the platform, right? So it's in the application database somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think about this, and I understand now. It's a lot more complex than one would think, and it's not
Yeah.
intended to say that it's not. It's just I understand now why a lot of things are the way they are because of the complex nature of this.
Yeah.
Do,
Yeah.
do you
It's
also
very
work with?
interesting. Yeah.
It is. It's almost. I wish I could have. It's nice to have the opportunity to speak with you, to have the behind the scenes, under the hood, to understand what's involved in the language that we use to develop the
You gotta sign your
application.
life away.
Yeah.
They
It's
allow you to do that.
Oh, well, if I ever get over there, I'm calling a few of the guys in the office to have a private tour. So hopefully I get over there. Maybe they'll let
Yeah.
me in. Maybe they won't.
Of course.
No, but it'd be nice to speak with everybody there. The So you work with also the reports, like the way that the compiler handles the generation of the reports, the creation of the reports for the RDLC, the Word, the Excel. Wow, there's so
Yeah.
much to this now that
Oh yeah.
your group is responsible for, and those that work on it.
Yeah.
Because as I'm thinking of all of the pieces as you're explaining to this, that's a lot to manage and a lot
Oh,
to.
we have a shared responsibility with the runtime on a lot of these things. Like my team is not responsible for the runtime of records and reports and stuff like that. We are responsible for the language around it, the generation of the app package, the import into the platform, making sure the platform can read, understand, and manipulate the metadata and resources that are in the app file. Once that's kind of made available to the runtime, then that's where the runtime takes over and does the execution, does the merging of data sets with report layouts and all these things, right? So it's there is a shared responsibility there.
But that's still a lot. I can't
Oh yeah,
imagine having to work
yeah,
with all that, and then the coordination that needs to be made among all of the members
yeah.
of both
It's
teams.
runtime and it's client and the application teams and it's yeah administration and yeah partner telemetry and like we lots of dependencies in this. Yeah, yeah.
uh,
It's
Telemetry.
it's a lot sometimes to manage, but I have a good team and they are specialized in each their own area, so not everyone knows everything about everything. We have some people who are really good at the app source and all the app source cup rules and all these things. We have some people who are really, really good at the core compiler work, and some are like experts in like the V6 and TypeScript that goes into the V6 and all these things. And like very broad responsibility means we need to segment yourself.
No, absolutely. It's nobody
Yeah,
can know everything in this world that's changing in such a dynamic fashion and even growing within the Business Central community with the whole Azure Stack Power Platform.
hmm,
There's so much to it that it's not like it was when it first started, where it was an application. It still was a very powerful application, powerful language, but it was small and it
yeah,
didn't change as often. Now, with the advances in technology, it can change overnight. Features can get added with
yeah,
the collaboration that now is available. It's you do have to focus, I think, on some areas, and it gives you on the side a better quality of life. So you're not stressed of I need to know everything, I need to learn everything. So it's good.
it's kind
Well,
of fun for some of the engineers on my team because they get to touch things in a way that others wouldn't. Like they work closely with the client team on Power BI integration because there are some scenarios that needs language support. They get exposed to that scenario, that new functionality, even though they're not really implementing that functionality, they're just supporting it, right? And the same with some of the app features, they need to help an app team doing something with streams that needs new support or whatever. They don't know that feature, but they get exposed to that feature. They learn about that feature. They learn a little bit about warehouse management or data exchange framework or you name it. Like these very big topics, they get exposed to in a way that other developers in the Business Central teams are not exposed to in the same way. So that's
no,
pretty cool, I
I
think.
could see
Yeah,
that that is excellent, and it must be an amazing position because of that. You
absolutely.
get to see it from all sides. I can't even imagine. But well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us this evening. The amount of information that you shared with us is amazing. I learned
My
a
pleasure.
lot and I had a lot of questions, and I look at this different in some cases because I did not fully understand all that was involved behind the simple, V6 that I go into Visual Studio Code, I install the extension, I start writing AL, hit publish, and here it is. It's on my
Yeah,
Business Central local on-prem implementation, or it's on my sandbox, or I have to just create an app file that I import. It's all simple on the surface, but what goes on behind it to make sure that that works so that you can have a successful customer implementation and application is amazing.
yeah.
So thank you again for all of the information that you shared. If you would, could you take a
Yes.
moment, if could you share how anyone could communicate with you or get a hold of you to see some of the great things that you're working on and learn more about your team and what you're doing?
Yeah, so I think that the best ways to get in contact with us on specific issues is the AL GitHub repository. If they want to contact me directly, contact me on Yammer, ping me on Twitter, whatever. I should be fairly easy to find. I'm the big guy with the big beard. And most people have seen me on Directions or Tech Days or someplace like that. Just come up and talk to me. I'll be happy to answer questions for whatever I can answer. Of course, I don't know everything. I'll try to be as open as possible. I don't think we have anything to hide. So we take the bad things with the good things.
No,
So
I appreciate that. And I appreciate everyone in the group, because I personally have noticed the big difference that there is the intent of transparency, even with the conversations I've had with you and other members of the team. Like you said, you take the good or bad, and the intent is for collaboration versus,
exactly.
Like you said, this is what I do, you deal with it. It's more of, hey, if there's a problem, let's figure out the best way to fix it without creating more problems.
It's easy to find you, Steffen.
Thank you again.
You get the biker beard going.
Exactly. And if you see me at conferences, I got the BC tattoo in the old logo.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
that is great. No, you're very easy. You'll have to send me some pictures of your bike. I would like to take a look at it. It's as I had said, I had
Steffen,
road mode.
I'm a Triumph rider, so I've been I've used Triumph in the past. Yeah. So. Rider for life.
They're also nice bikes, but it was a dream for me to get a Harley. It's one of the things that you have to get, right? And in Denmark, it's like 180% import tax and all sorts of things.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, it's a very special thing for me, at least.
No, I can imagine,
awesome.
And hopefully you. I think the landscape there is great for riding too. I know here it's a great landscape where I live in the Northeast.
Yeah,
part of me feels like I should just get back on the bike, and if I get hit, I get hit. Right? It's not me with the riding; it's the other people. But it's such a great feeling to get out there on a nice day in the mountains, going on the winding roads. I'm not saying you have to go fast; just to get out there and you feel the wind and the fresh air. It's just it's a feeling that's
hard to explain.
Sayings at some time saying, yeah, exactly. Somebody was telling me at some point that when you drive a car, you think everybody's idiots and driving like idiots, but when you drive a motorcycle, you think everybody's out to kill you. With that mentality, you'll be safe.
See, and that's a true saying, because if you go back to what I said, why I stopped, because everyone was out to kill me.
Yeah, exactly.
So after 20 plus years, I stopped. So maybe I have to get back on. Maybe I'll go pick one up.
I love riding in Florida. I have family over there, and I go there every now and then to take some rides up and down the coast, and I really love that area.
Yeah,
also.
It's beautiful.
It's very nice and very different from Denmark. Yeah.
Well, the next time you come to next time you come to the U.S., you have to come up to this area. You'll get some nice winding roads in the mountains. It's not Florida. Florida's tough because Florida has a lot of traffic. They have those 4-lane roads. I don't know how some people drive motorcycles in Orlando or some of the other big cities.
Try to avoid that.
Or the Pacific Northwest,
US1 and all A1A, like
Pacific Northwest too. Where Redmond is someday.
Right? Yeah, I would like to go to Mount Rainier and see if I can find a road somewhere up the mountain. That would be
There's a lot.
Cool. Yeah,
that's pretty good.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
All right. Anyway. Thank you again. We appreciate it, and we look to talk with you soon. Ciao. Thank you, Chris, for your time for another episode of In the Dynamics Corner Chair. And thank you to our guests for participating.
Thank you, Brad, for your time. It is a wonderful episode of Dynamics Corner Chair. I would also like to thank our guests for joining us. Thank you for all of our listeners tuning in as well. You can find Brad at developerlife.com. That is DVLPRLIFE.com. And you can interact with them via Twitter, DVLPRLIFE. You can also find me at matalino.io, matalino.io. And my Twitter handle is matalino16. And you can see those links down below in their show notes. Again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, and take care.